Welcome back to LUTE Labs. Our game from the previous video will always play out the same way once you pick either answer. So let's give our game something to remember so it can react to something that's already happened in the past. A variable is just a name storage on the flow engine. An order that uses a conditional statement, such as an if order, reads this variable and decides what will happen next. Let's take a look at this closer in the editor. So we're back in the Unity editor with the game from the previous video still open and loaded in the flow engine. This time we're going to add some variables and then a conditional if statement to actually execute something based on the current value of a variable. Variables, as with nodes and orders, exist on the flow engine itself. If we go to the flow engine inspector, there's a variable button here that we can press. This loads the list of variables. To add a new variable, we can simply press the add button here, and a list of different types of variables appear. We've got some pretty common types, which you are most likely familiar with, such as booleans, floats, integers, and some new types which you might not be familiar with, locations, inventories, dates. For now, let's keep it simple and add an integer variable. When you add a new variable, it gives you the type, the name, and the value. Let's give this name, integer variable, a name of lives. So the player has a set amount of lives, and they start with, let's just say, 1 life to make things a bit simple. Okay? So the most common use of a variable is used in a conditional statement, most notably an if statement. If you are a somewhat, beginner programmer, you should be very familiar with the concept of if statements. Okay? In this case, with LUTE, we can create visual if statements or conditional statements within the flow engine. So I've created a new node here called a conditional node, and I'm going to set an if statement on this node. Okay? So on the node, I'm going to use the add order button, and I'm just going to type in the if statement. Okay? So all of the conditional kind of statements and a lot of things that work with variables are under the logic grouping. So we'll add the if order now. Okay? Now, the first thing to note here is on the order itself, on the if order itself, we have any or all of conditions. Okay? Essentially, what we can do is add a list of ifs, and if any of these are true, it will move on to the next order in the list. But if we choose all of, it must ensure that all of the conditions in this statement must be true until we move on. Whereas any of or will ensure that any of the statements are true, it will move on to the next statement. So let's keep it simple for now. Let's just use one condition, okay? We choose the variable, and in this case, there's only one, our lives variable, and we say compare with 0, and the compare operator will be equals. There's other operators here, which you should be quite familiar with. They are using plain text rather than the actual symbols to make it a little bit easier to follow and read, okay? So in this case, all we're saying is if lives equals 0, we'll move on to the next order in the list. So let's add that order. We'll say dialog, and what you'll see here is it indents, okay? So if this becomes true, anything that is indented within inside this conditional statement will then be executed, okay? So we'll get our character hippo here to say game over, okay? So if lives equals 0, we're in game over mode, okay? Now, we can add an else statement. So often an if statement comes with an else. So if we just simply search for else, we'll see that this is contained. So if lives equals 0, it's game over. Otherwise, we can add another dialog and we can say not game over. Okay. If you want to encapsulate a statement and have it kind of done properly, we just use the end order, and that just simply encapsulates all of our conditional orders in a nice, clean, and organized manner. Okay, and as we noted previously, if any node has a conditional order on it, it gets the icon here, so you can see it as a visual representation when you view the Flow engine as an overview. So at the moment, we're not actually doing anything with these lives or this node. So let's tie this all together now. If we go back to our question statement, we have our dialog and we can choose a correct answer or an incorrect answer. Let's go to the incorrect answer for now. Okay, so we'll remove the next node and we'll delete that. And what we'll do is set the lives variable. So if I type in set, you should be able to see variable and then set variable. Okay, all this is going to do is grab the variable that you've chosen and set it to a specific value. So we'll choose the lives value and we'll say set lives to 0. Okay. For the correct answer, we'll do the same thing. We'll remove the next node. We'll add a set variable. We'll choose lives and we'll set it to 2. Okay. So we gain a life if we get it right. For both of these nodes, we're going to add a new next node order and we're going to go to that conditional order that we've just created. So let's have a look at this in runtime. You can see the variable list on the Flow engine window by navigating to the bottom left and opening the variable list here. But you can also see it just by clicking it and seeing it here. So we should be able to see this execute and change the value during runtime with these two nodes here. Okay, so let's play it and see what happens. So the same intro as before, we get our information text and a question. Let's choose the incorrect answer, and when we do, you should see this turn to 0. Okay, there it goes, changed to 0, and because lives is now 0, we're seeing this instead. Okay, so let's go back and we'll restart the game and see it from the other angle. Okay, so same process again. Just got to let Unity compile for a moment. Okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, so the information, the question, let's give it the correct answer. And we'll see this turn to 2 and not game over up here. So that's the basics of variables and how they work with conditional statements. You can expand on this by using more complex conditional statements like for loops and while loops. But in this example, we're just offering a small example in which we remember a variable and we use it in a conditional statement. Next up, we'll bring in real-world locations and how they connect to the variables that we've just learned. Thanks for watching with LUTE Labs, and we'll see you in the next one.